Hey everybody, welcome back to another week and another episode of Lionheart Radio. Today we're talking with Colin O'Brady, who just finished up a project called Beyond 7-2. And as we get into the episode, we'll really talk about all of that project entailed and all the goodwill that it did in the world. What I would encourage you to do is really think about the way that Colin O'Brady approached this project and the way that he approaches everything in life, because I think that there's a lot to learn from the mindset that he takes. It's really easy for people to hear a story like this and hear about somebody really pushing the bounds of human potential and to stand on the sideline and think, well, that's not me. I'm not capable of things like that. And I think it's just that mindset that, puts us in a trap and holds us back from accomplishing pretty great things in life. You might not want to summit Everest and you might not even want to run an Ironman, but hearing their story and taking that mindset that they take in approaching everything that you do in life with that mindset can really set you apart and set you up for a really great life. So without further ado, Colin O'Brady. All right, welcome back to Lionheart Radio. I'm your host, Rick Alexander, founder of Lou Aviv in San Diego, California. And today I'm joined by pro triathlete turned adventurer. He is a two-time world record holder for the 7 Summits as well as the Explorers Grand Slam. We'll get into what all of that is in just a minute. But essentially, the Explorers Grand Slam is the 7 Summits plus a trek to the North and South Pole. He did this all in 139 days, blasting the old record by 2 months. My guest today is Colin O'Brady, so thanks for being on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Rick.
Cool. So that's a lot, and I definitely want to unpack what that project, the Beyond 7-2 project was and kind of what got you there. But if we could take a step back, what was the athletic catalyst, so to speak, for you to even get involved in these kind of challenges at first, or even triathlete at first?
Yeah, I grew up super active kid. Parents put me into sports as a young age. I was a swimmer and a soccer player growing up. And my mom jokes that she was just trying to find the sports that would just keep me moving the most. So I tried baseball, and I came home still too rambunctious. So she was like, no, we're scratching that. We'll go to swimming. So you just like swimming back and forth in the pool all the time, trying to tire me out.
Yeah.
That's kind of where my sports career started. I always loved sports from a young age. Went on to be recruited to both swim and play soccer in college, and I ultimately chose swimming. And I swam at Yale University for my 4 years of college, a Division I swimmer. That was kind of brings me through childhood and college in sports.
Nice. And how old were you when you turned pro triathlete?
Yeah, so my sort of road to being a professional triathlete was an interesting path. I turned pro, I think, when I was, 23 or 24. So I swam through college, as I mentioned, graduated when I was 21, and kind of thought that, my athletic career was over, as it is for most Division I athletes at the end of their career, unless they're, going to the Olympics or professional sports leagues.
Sure.
And I decided to take a trip and travel around the world during that year after college. And unfortunately, during that year, I was in Thailand, and I ended up being severely burned in a fire in Thailand. So I was in this hospital room, and I, said to myself, I want to one day complete a triathlon. I definitely wasn't chasing sort of professional triathlon career by any means. I was basically in a hospital bed, being able to walk. But since sports had always been something that had propelled me further, that's sort of what my goal in recovery sort of landed on. And so I set myself this goal in the Thai hospital room to one day complete a triathlon. And over the course of that time, over the next 18 months, literally going from not walking again, being flown home to the United States after 3 months in Thailand in the hospitals, still having not taken a single step, to being back in my house in Portland, Oregon, at my parents' house, and learning how to walk again and one day run. I just kind of had that triathlon goal in my mind the entire time. And so about 18 months after leaving the Thai hospital, I found myself in Chicago working a job out there in finance, and signed up for the Chicago Triathlon. And so I signed up for that race, trained for it, and finished that race. And it was my first race ever, and my goal was just to finish. And ended up not only finishing the Chicago Triathlon, but actually winning the entire race. Which was a crazy moment for me in my life, super unexpected, but certainly opened the doors for me to quit my day job in finance and turn pro in triathlon.
Now let me ask you this. So from incident to your first triathlon, which you won, you said 18 months, a year and a half?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And how important was it, or or maybe it wasn't, you can correct me, but finding a doctor that was on board with what your plan was. So or a physical therapist, a physio that was down to help you achieve your goals, because I think this is something in the athletic community that happens a lot. People become injured, or they have they get sidelined, but maybe not as catastrophic as an injury, but they get sidelined, and then their doctor's answer is always, well, you're not going to be able to do that anymore. You're not going to be able to snatch and clean and jerk anymore, or run anymore. Sure. So how important was finding the right healthcare provider?
Yeah, obviously I was in Thailand when this all happened, and so really just trying to keep me alive in those circumstances. The first week that I was in the Thai hospital, there was literally a cat running around my bed in the ICU, and I went under 8 surgeries. Pretty much the last place in the world you want to find yourself. Fortunately, when I was finally moved to Bangkok after the 8th day, I was under some better medical care, but still, of course, being overseas in the hospital is a pretty scary thing. And yeah, the doctors were pretty certain, even when I got back to the United States, that I would never walk again normally, basically because the way that the burns were over my legs, particularly my knee and ankle joints, the ligaments, that they thought that the ligaments would be damaged and then my mobility would be really compromised because of the scar tissue healing over the ankles and knees and whatnot. And so, I have to say, ultimately, in the end, I did, in the long run, find some people in the medical profession that were supportive of me once they did see me sort of being able to exceed their expectations in recovery. But the most important person really was my mother throughout this time, who sat in the hospital room with me. And although she was just as afraid as a mother would be, imagine seeing your son unable to walk and in a Thai hospital on the other side of the world, she really came in every day and said to me, like, I believe in you. I think you can get through this. Let's talk about the future. What do you want to do when you get out of here? Let's set a goal, and kind of kept me in this positive aspirational mindset. And I attribute that, tremendously to a catalyst for my own personal success over time. And so really, it did take at least having someone, at least one person, believe in me, because I was really going down a dark downward spiral, being 22 years old, being told he'd never walk again, and an active athlete my whole life, just kind of thought life as I knew it was over. And so it was a huge moment for me to, get on the other side of that and recover. Yeah, no, like you said, it's hard. And sometimes when athletes get injured, in many different ways, and having been a professional athlete now for many years, I've seen it a lot, which is it's very easy to say, oh, that athlete will never be the same, or oh, they'll never be as good as they were, and that can be really hard, tough pill to swallow, because so much of, as an athlete, your identity is all wrapped up sort of in your ability to perform as an athlete, and so that can be really challenging. I guess I would just say that I'm a living testament to sometimes the doctors don't have it 100% right, and sometimes when people tell you can't do things, that's not just in sports, but in all walks of life, people say, oh, that's impossible, you can't do this, or why do you think you could achieve this? And I'm a big believer that we really can achieve what we believe that we can, and that as humans we have reservoirs of untapped potential waiting to be released. And so when we shift towards that positive mindset, I do think that we can achieve amazing things, even when the first people might, not believe that we can.
Sure. And do you think that played the biggest part in your success with your mindset?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that, to me, that was an incredible value and valuable lesson. And I didn't see the entire magnitude of that, in the present moment. I kind of my mom, kind of teased me into setting a goal. And I said, fine, Mom, I'll do a triathlon one day. Right. And that was this flippant goal. But then I started, day by day, started to believe in my own goal a little bit more. And then certainly 18 months later, finishing the Chicago Triathlon, not just finishing and winning, kind of brought that lesson full circle to me. It was like, wow, like that was a watershed moment of like, wow, maybe I can achieve some really incredible things in my life, and definitely laid the foundational groundwork for where I am now, to having set 2 world records last year. Certainly a lot of my belief in self and doing that comes from having learned those lessons. And I've faced countless setbacks between winning the Chicago Triathlon and, 9 years later setting 2 world records. There's also a number of setbacks and obstacles that I faced along the way. But in the face of all of those obstacles, I would remember, how possible it is to overcome those, and that there's positivity on the other side.
And in your pursuits, either triathlon or as an explorer, what do you think? What was the biggest setback that you faced?
I mean, there's we could do 5 podcasts on the different setbacks. Yeah. Let's see the biggest ones. I mean, certainly the burn, obviously is a really one stands out. We've already covered, but in terms of the journey itself, one of the things that I think is interesting, and I think probably pertains to more than just my own personal story, was, through triathlon, I had many setbacks, but also many successes. It gave me the opportunity to travel to 25 countries around the world and race all over the world, live all over the world, 6 continents, 25 countries, like I said, an incredible gift. And training day to day out, injuries, setbacks. I was super overtrained at one point. My testosterone levels were that of like a 90-year-old man, and I could barely get out of bed because I'd just been pushing my body so hard. So learning how to balance my strength and recovery through that, and still coming back from that to excel. But one of the bigger setbacks that stands out to me was when I decided to pivot away from triathlon, actually having come off just winning a half Ironman event. So racing was going well. I had solid sponsorship at this point. And I said, you know what? I actually feel like I want to do the next thing in my career, which is I want to chase this mountaineering world record. And the amount of people that said to me, like, wait, well, you're not a professional mountaineer. You're winning races in triathlon. You have sponsorship. I was 29 at the time. The peak age for triathlon, is 33, 34, 35. And Craig Alexander won a world championship when he's 37 or something like that. So, you're talking about I had many years in front of me to continue to excel in that sport. Why would I pivot away from that to do something that, A, I wasn't certainly not an expert in, and then they're like, but Anna, that's going to cost a lot of money. Like, where are you going to raise the money to do that? Like, that just doesn't make sense. And so I'd say the setback and the lesson there is, people, when you put out a huge aspirational goal, people are very quick to tell you, like, well, why do you think that's going to work? Or why is your business idea, going to work? This is a kind of a random tangent, but I was listening to a podcast recently, about Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx, the first self-made billionaire female in the United States. Incredible inspiration story in the business. Yep. And she had this idea for hosiery, which, again, as a male, I don't quite understand, but obviously it's revolutionary what she did. And she was saying in this podcast, like, the amount of people, close friends, family, that were looking out for her best interest, that said, like, are you sure you want to do this? You have a good job in sales right now. Are you sure you want to believe in this? And having the strength and presence of mind or personal confidence to say, you know what, actually, like, I do believe in this idea, and I do want to put my whole heart into this. And of course, for her, it turned into a $1 billion enterprise. And if I had listened to the people that doubted me at first, I wouldn't be sitting here with 2 world records and having been to the summit of Mount Everest and be the North and South Pole. I would have gone like, you're right, that idea is crazy. What was I thinking? Like, I shouldn't try to do that. And so I think that that's something that we can all learn, is like, when we deeply feel something, almost intuitively, passionately about something, hold on to that, follow that as far as you could. And you are going to get people with a pragmatic viewpoint to say, oh, that's not really worth it. But like, people that do extraordinary things, people that change the world, whether business or even just in their own like lives and whatever their world is, 1 block away from the house, whatever. Those are people that believe that they can do what they're doing and are willing to fear failing to at least try.
Sure. And what?
Excuse me.
Yeah. What was it? I guess what was it that really, was it just a gut feeling? Why did you pivot? Right? Because that would be the obvious question. It's like, why?
Sure. Yeah. For me, I kind of had this, interestingly, in that same moment of having won that race that I described, and it was the end of that season, the end of the 2014 triathlon racing season. My fiancée, Jenna, and I we got engaged not long after that race on the top of a mountain a few weeks later in Ecuador. And so it was sort of a transitional moment in my life in terms of, my life and partnership and all that kind of stuff. But also, it was a moment where I kind of asked myself, like, have I ticked this box? Like, I'd wanted to be a pro athlete since I was a little kid, and obviously I got a job in finance and never thought I'd be a professional triathlete, and ended up having this opportunity and spending 6 years racing all over the world, and it was an incredible experience that I deeply cherish. But I kind of got to a point of asking myself, like, so I win this race, maybe my sponsors are happy, I'm personally gratified. And then it kind of felt like it ended there a little bit. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to belittle the experience or belittle that experience for any other professional triathlete or endurance athlete out there, because to me, those are some of my fondest experiences of my entire life. But at that point, I felt like, I just had this weird sense of like, I feel like I've done this chapter. Like, I feel like I'm proud of what I've accomplished here. Many times I dreamed of being an Olympic medalist or, then didn't quite reach that pinnacle, but I had done well. I had been, one of the, highly ranked athletes in the world. Like I said, raced all over the world. And it kind of felt like, I wonder if now I can do something with my athleticism that is personally inspiring to me, that I can continue to push my body at the highest levels, but also has a larger impact than just myself. And so really we coined my world record project Beyond 7-2, the 7 standing for the 7 summits and 2 the 2 poles, but this idea of this word beyond, which was that this project was something beyond just my own personal exploration or trying to set world records. But really this project, we started a nonprofit, which with the same name, Beyond 7-2, with the idea of inspiring kids specifically, but really anyone everywhere to set big goals, to go outside, to move their bodies, to live active and healthy lifestyles. And so this whole nonprofit was focused on combating childhood obesity and really inspiring kids to move their bodies in healthful ways. And that's really was the larger focus. Because again, your question was, why pivot? Well, it was, for me, it didn't feel so much like a pivot because I still feel like I was getting the benefit of pushing my body to an extreme way to test my own personal limits, which continues to be a passion of mine. But I reframed it in a way that could have a larger benefit for not just myself on and off the race course, but hopefully for thousands or not hundreds of thousands of people and kids particularly around the country.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated by this idea that humans are the only animals that get to choose our own evolution. And I'm always curious as to what it is, the things that we think and the things that we do that cause us to decide to evolve in a certain one way over another. And it sounds like for you, what decided your next evolution was just that feeling that you were capable of more and that you wanted to be something maybe a little bit bigger than yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think it was a testament, and upon reflection kind of in this period, it was like, wow, like I've gotten to where I am, not because like, I'm just like some amazing, like superhuman person, like not at all. It was mostly like, wow, like I've benefited from mentors and coaches and, my dad's an organic farmer and my mom and stepdad had a chain of natural foods grocery stores. So I was just happened to be born into a situation where like healthful eating and wellness was like a part of my life because I had these like hippie parents basically.
Right.
But then in the long run, I realized like, wow, like how fortunate I was to have some of those things in my life. And for better or for worse, not every, kid in this country has, the access or resources or even inspiration around those types of things. So I don't pretend to be, some messiah with the answer for everyone, but I did think that, hey, I could give back in a way that could help and impact, some other people's lives. And as we've grown, the nonprofit work we've done, and I've virtually and in person talked to now hundreds of thousands of kids and shared my stories. And I know from emails I get and notes I get on a daily basis from teachers and kids and students that I've worked with that I am having an impact. Am I having the one and only final last day of impact? I don't know. Maybe not. But I certainly, by sharing the story, by putting it into the world, and by talking with teachers and providing inspiration around health and wellness, there certainly has been an impact. And that feels really good to contribute and give back in a way, again, like you said, to use your words, that's bigger than my own self.
Sure. Before we jump into Beyond 7-2, you mentioned something about the people that make it and the people that don't. And you said the people that kind of dare to, the Sarah Blakeleys of the world, and the people that change the world, the people that saw success like yourself. In your maybe opinion, what do you think is the biggest determining factor? Because there's a lot of people, I think, that we might be going over that want to do something great or even maybe try and don't make it. It just happens to be that the people that do achieve it get the microphone, they end up on the podcast.
Sure.
What do you think the difference is between those people and then people like yourself, the people that found it?
Well, I mean, what I would say is if you haven't made it yet, it means that you're just still continuing on the journey. It's not this binary thing like, oh, hey, I'm the one that has the 2 world records and you're the one that tried and failed. Before I got here, I mean, people say, oh, well, you were never a mountaineer before. So then you kind of trained for the mountains for a year and then you went and set these 2 like really challenging world records in mountaineering. Like that's just like this crazy, like out of nowhere thing. And that's one way to frame this. What I would argue is that when I dove into a swimming pool for the first time when I was 5 years old, I began the 25-year journey that eventually culminated in me setting 2 world records, meaning that like I trained every single day. I swam back and forth in a swimming pool. I built mental toughness and fortitude by winning races and losing races and getting injured as an athlete and understanding my body and understanding nutrition and diving into meditation and meditation practice to understand my own mind. And like, I mean, I could go on and on and on and on. of the tiny little like drops in a bucket or grains of sand that kind of fill the totality of this experience. And so what I would say, to answer your question of what's the difference between the people that make it and not make it, is that like if you talked to me 3 years ago, you might have been like, oh, like this guy's got done some cool stuff, but he doesn't have a world record, or he doesn't have like this huge like thing you could put right next to his name. Maybe I wouldn't be on the podcast at that point, but I was on the journey towards doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And so the people that I believe that ultimately make it, or if you want to talk about business, music, art, sports, whatever, like canvas you want to talk about, are people that continue to take steps forwards, continue to keep trying. And your quote unquote successful moment, you could be, Simone Biles and be 16, 17 years old at the Olympic Games, win 4 gold medals, and have that success at a super young age, or Maria Sharapova winning Wimbledon when she's 17. Like that's incredibly young age to achieve that level of success. Or you could be, Warren Buffett, who has like piece by piece over, value investing over 60, 70 years, like become like an extraordinary, business success. But that was like just over time, just chipping away at the process. And so I would say to me, I always say, I like to say this line, which is there is no there. There is no there, just make it. Like I'm not sitting here with 2 world records with my feet up on my couch like, well, I did it. Like awesome. Right. I'm still on the process of the journey. So I think the people, there really is no difference between the people that have quote unquote made it or not make it. I think we're all on a journey, and it really is just a matter of how much effort and willingness you are to continue down that path, particularly when things get hard. Because it's easy to go when you're having success, but it's another thing to pull yourself out of bed and continue to believe in yourself when things do get tough.
Yeah, sure. I think something you alluded to that right there, a lot of people spend a lot of time trying to make it, trying to figure out what their passion is and like what they want to spend their life doing. And I think one of the indicators to you figuring that out is when you feel like, oh, I've been training my whole life for this, right?
You're right. It was absolutely 100%. And I think that there is, it's like I have been training. Like it doesn't seem like the 5-year-old kid jumping into the swimming pool is training to summit Everest, in 1990 is training to summit Everest in 2016 instead of world records. Like those don't necessarily seem like so obvious of parallels, but like there are a ton of parallels. And then go a step further than that. Okay, both those are athletic pursuits, but I mentioned meditation there. It's like, I randomly got introduced to meditation, 6 or 7 years ago. And that doesn't necessarily think like that the guy that's, dragging a sled to the South Pole and the North Pole. But let me tell you, like when it's minus 40 degrees out and you have if you have if you have a sled, 100-pound sled on your back and you're exhausted and it's white in every direction, so there's nothing to go. It's like, what are you doing? Like you're meditating, like, and your mind can either drive you crazy in those moments and make you want to quit and give up every step of the way with negative self-talk, or the discipline that I put into a meditation practice that I didn't realize was necessary leading me for that moment allowed me to push and persevere through that really, really challenging mental part of this journey. So my success in what I've recently done, in my opinion, certainly is a culmination of many different trials and errors over time.
Yeah, sure. Going into the project and formulating the project, what came first? Was it the cause? Or was it the actual, hey, I'm going to do this big project and I want to do the most good in the world?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting sort of chicken before the egg question. I really think that they were born in tandem. Like I said, Jen and I found ourselves on a mountaintop in Ecuador, and I was, down on one knee, asking her to marry me, and at the same time, kind of dreaming about what we wanted our future and our life together to look like. And, along those lines, we kind of, we have a habit of sitting down every year and, setting our own personal goals and our goals collectively, throughout the year. And this was certainly a big moment of being engaged, making that kind of commitment to one another of thinking about what do we want the future to be like. And as we went through that, we kind of came up with, I was like thinking of some of my childhood dreams. Everest had always been a boyhood dream of mine. And I always kind of thought about the 7 summits and stuff like that. So you kind of start going, well, I wonder if I could do that. I wonder if I could this. And then at the exact same time thinking about this idea, which I alluded to before, which was like triathlon was great, but I wonder if there's a larger impact that I could make in the world. And then it was kind of like this aha moment of like, oh my God, I wonder if we could combine those two passions to actually help both things elevate, one another, this athletic pursuit with a larger mission. So really, I think that they were born from the same moment.
And what is it that just made you decide that, hey, I want to start my own nonprofit versus finding one? Because doing
Yes.
the project really hard, right? Finding the best way to spend money and to attack a cause that you care about is probably equally as demanding. So what was it that made you decide, hey, I'm gonna actually start the nonprofit to do this?
That's a really great question. I will be honest that when Jenna and I, dove into this entire project, and all the different facets of this project, we had a beautiful level of naivete to this, and thinking like, oh, we can just like start a nonprofit, and we can set a world record, and we can raise sponsors, and we can get tons of media, and
Yeah,
like,
right, right.
yep. And she actually, we say this joke that she's always been incredibly supportive of me, but she does have obviously some of her own personal pursuits going on. And at this time, she had said like, oh, like I'll help you with this, like I'll help you like a couple days a week on this. And like 1 week into trying to do all this, she was like, so you need my help 100 hours a week, every week for the next 2 years, and you can't pay me anything, right? And I'm kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, right.
So that's suffice to say, we bit off a lot more than we could chew. But in the end, we have been relatively successful with it all, but we have been overwhelmed by that process. What we learned about the nonprofit, to specifically answer your question, was, partnerships were really actually fundamental in what we were doing. We do have our own standalone 501c3 called Beyond 72. But really where we've been able to make the most impact is by really forging those partnerships, because ultimately we didn't quite have the bandwidth nor staff or resources to do our own programs and create that. So what we did is we actually partner with an organization called the Alliance for a Healthier Generation, which is an incredible organization that's impacting 20 million kids nationwide in 29,000 schools, and doing curriculums within schools and with PE teachers and physical education around health and wellness, and really in line with what we were doing. And so that was a great partnership, because what they had is basically a huge network of teachers and schools that were inspired to be working in this space. And then the story that I was creating by doing this world record was this sort of unique teaching moment that they could bring within the schools. And it was incredible to see how that grew. So they were able to kind of tap into their network of people. And we did, built this whole sort of media and social media campaign around what I was doing and telling the story in real time. And teachers essentially over that semester, and actually this lives on now, but particularly when it was going on, which was last spring and fall, or sorry, excuse me, last spring, when this world record was happening, they would, I would be out climbing, and the kids would like look on the blog every single day, and then the teachers would say, okay, let's do a unit on whatever country Colin's in. And so over the course of the semester, they would say, oh my God, so he's in Nepal now. Let's learn about atmospheric pressures from a science, and curriculum would talk about like atmospheric pressure, the science of mountains, geology, that kind of stuff. But they'd also talk about, the cuisine and culture of a Nepal. And then all of a sudden I'm in Tanzania. Well, like, where is Tanzania on the map? Let's talk about that. All within this sort of larger guise of aspirational goal setting. And then we initiated this project with these schools called What's Your Everest? And so we started, Colin's climbing Mount Everest right now, and you guys have been following this along, but, Colin wants to ask you guys, what's your Everest? What are your big goals that you have in your own life? And so kids, while I was literally on Everest, were sending me video clips and messages and doing projects in these schools saying, hey, my Mount Everest is to be the first person in my family to graduate from college, or my Mount Everest is to one day, be a great violinist, so I'm going to go home and practice every single day. My Everest is to be a scientist one day. And so kind of building the metaphor of what I was doing, bringing it into the classroom in this interesting sort of way. And it was beautiful. So the partnership example was great, because we did not have the relationships with these schools, and the Alliance for a Healthier Generation did, but they were able to bring, hey, there's this really kind of unique story that's playing out right now with this guy who's super passionate about, talking to kids and trying to inspire them. What if we sort of combine forces? They had the boots on the ground to facilitate those programs, but I was bringing this super unique story that captured and captivated the attention of the students. And so it was this really beautiful synergy that played out over time with that.
What kind of pressure did that put on you when you're getting clips? Like, what if because yeah, it's possible a storm rolls in and you don't get to Everest, right?
No, 100%. I mean, it definitely added a serious layer of pressure. I like definitely definitely pressure. I also can think about it as inspiration. When I was actually, so You mentioned at the beginning, but I was just going to give a quick recap. So the Explorers Grand Slam, what I was setting out to do was to climb the tallest mountain on each of the 7 continents, as well as complete expeditions to both the North Pole and South Pole, world record time, which basically meant I was completing an expedition, not going home or anything, and just flying straight to the next one. So I'd get off the mountain, I would arrive to the South Pole, or climb Aconcagua or Kilimanjaro, and I'd literally get on a plane at the base of the mountain, fly to the next mountain, and continue climbing up the next one. So no breaks in between. And just based on weather patterns and the seasons, Everest was my 8th of 9 expeditions. So by the time I got to Everest, I'd already been going for 100+ days. And my very first summit attempt, on Everest, I got up above 26,000 feet, which is known as the death zone, going for the summit. And a huge storm rolled in, 50, 60 mile per hour winds. I was just climbing with just myself and one Sherpa by the name of Pasang Bodhi. It took us, 2 hours just to set up our tent and try to get out of the storm. And it was a very sort of scary set of circumstances, because this is the exact circumstance where many people have died on that mountain.
Yeah.
And ultimately we had to descend down the mountain the next day after waiting out the storm through the night. It was still just raging when we woke up, and there was no way we were going to be able to continue towards the summit. So we had to back off. And in that moment, it was a very sad and depressing moment, because, I had completed 7 of the 9 expeditions. I had gotten super close to climbing Everest, and it looked like, hey, good job. You tried, weather rolled in, no go. You don't normally make more than 1 summit attempt on Everest.
Right.
And your question was sort of about these kids and the pressure and all that, the mounting sort of media exposure that was building at this time. Certainly the kids, what I thought to myself was I have to keep trying. I'm out here trying to be a role model, and I'm not necessarily trying to inspire kids to climb Mount Everest. If they want to think about climbing a mountain one day, that's great. But I definitely wasn't trying to inspire kids to, necessarily even climb mountains, let alone Everest,
right.
Unless that's what they're passionate about, but more so climb their own goals or whatever, that is in their own life. And so I was I owe it to them to try as hard as I can, even though I'm exhausted, even though I'm backed in a corner, even though it doesn't look like I'm going to be able to summit. I want to exhaust every last effort. And so I, kind of cobbled together energy and resources on the mountain, etc., to give myself the opportunity to try to climb the mountain again. And fortunately, about 4 days later, the weather kind of cleared, and I had another attempt, and ultimately did reach the summit of Mount Everest. And then a week later, ended up setting the world record. But certainly, had I not had what you call pressure, and I certainly felt pressure, but also inspiration from others, so sort of this larger purpose guiding me, it would have been easier in those moments to just give up. Say, you know what, I tried. I got up to 26,000 feet on Everest. That's a proud moment.
Sure.
Whereas I was no, I don't want to let these kids down. I want to show them that anything is possible if you set your mind to it. And that sort of larger purpose definitely was a beautiful moment and a great learning moment for me, to show that not only are we capable of amazing things as humans, but I think that when we have a larger purpose or a deeper passion for what we are doing, we can achieve even greater things, because it just gives us that extra energy and courage to continue onward.
What was the Sherpa's reaction or mindset when you're hey, I know the right answer is to be done here, but I'm going to wait it out and try to make another attempt?
Pasang Bodhi is an incredible guy. Him and I had met climbing in Nepal in 2015 on one of my training climbs over there on a mountain called Manaslu, which is it's the 8th tallest mountain in the world, so quite a big mountain, similar to Everest actually. We've developed a great friendship over the course of the Everest expedition as well. And, he's amazing. When we summited Everest together, it was his 7th summit of Mount Everest. And he's just an incredibly strong yet humble person. And he was very supportive. He was I don't know, Colin, I think, and he was but if you want to go, I understand. He understand what I was trying to do with the world record. And ultimately, he was willing to, put himself out there. It's no small undertaking, even though he's been up there 7 times. He knows how bad it can get, and he was in that storm with me, and he knows what the weather looks like when it gets bad up there. But he also was very encouraging of me. He loved what I was doing, and just a testament to him, as well as the Sherpas in the Khumbu Valley who make that their life, of climbing that mountain, and the porters who support those expeditions out there. It's an incredibly hard, strenuous, and ultimately dangerous work. But they take a ton of pride in it, and they really are, they're certainly historically have been this idea that the Sherpas weren't as good of mountaineers, or not technically as mountaineers, don't have the gear and that kind of stuff, and that these, Western people like have these more knowledge or skills. And that is certainly not the case. And that I'm glad that that myth has been dispelled at this point, because the Sherpas over there really are just some of the strongest, most incredible athletes that I've ever met anywhere in the world. And that's speaking from someone who has trained and raced with the world-class athletes all over the world. I've never seen anything like it. And then on top of that, I've never seen anything, not only the fitness and strength, but the love and compassion that they bring to that endeavor, and how much pride they take in the mountain and the spirit of the mountain is really, really phenomenal. And so no Everest expedition, I don't care who you are, happens without the support of the local community there. And anyone who stood on top of that mountain can tell you that there's so much gratitude and love and respect for the Sherpas of Nepal.
Sure. One of the early obstacles that you mentioned was, okay, hey, this is going to be a really expensive thing to do. And you mentioned when you first put this into the world, people are like, hey, why are you doing this? Why are you pivoting? But what was it like when you started going to sponsors? Like, hey, I'm gonna need this money. Like, how did you proposition that value?
Yeah, it was a funny undertaking. Of course, having been a professional triathlete, I understood the world of sponsorship maybe better than the average person, although the world of sponsorship still is sort of this opaque,
Sure.
Who do you know, what value you're providing, how many Instagram followers do you have type of world. And at this point, I didn't have a ton of credibility. Of course, I had been a professional athlete, but triathlon not being super visible in the media, it's not like I had some mega following to go back on. A guy by the name of Brian Gelber had been supportive of me all throughout my triathlon career. He was actually my very first sponsor and longest standing sponsor. He was hugely supportive throughout my entire career. He was one of the first people that said, hey, if you can get some momentum around this project, I will help to support it. And so that gave us a little bit of momentum, for sure. However, there was still a huge chasm of how we're going to raise a significant amount of money around this project. And so, admittedly, it was just a ton of hard work and just entrepreneurial spirit of, 100 people said no to us before anyone said yes. I got everything from good luck, kid, or you're crazy. Another thing that, historic or context that was interesting was that in 2014 and 2015, the 2 years previous to my world record attempt, no one had summited Everest. So in 2014, there was a huge avalanche in the Khumbu Icefall that killed 16 Sherpas and closed the rest of the climbing season. And then in 2015, there was, of course, the huge earthquake in Nepal that not only closed the Everest climbing season, but devastated the entire country. Mm-hmm. And so when I was going into these meetings, not only did I not have any credibility as an athlete or someone who could pull this off, certainly not a professional mountaineer by any means, but not only that, people who knew about Everest specifically would say, so no one climbed Everest in 2014 and no one climbed Everest in 2015. You think you can climb Everest? Oh, and by the way, 8 other expeditions back to back to back. There's no way this is going to happen.
Yeah, right.
So there was a lot of doubt. Ultimately, we did find some amazing brand partnerships. Nike was incredibly supportive in the end, which was fantastic. Mountain Hardwear was a great support, and Columbia Sportswear from a outdoor apparel standpoint. Brian Gelber, who I mentioned, and some others, we ultimately did get the support. But it was not easy. And it was trying to find sponsors who were mission aligned. Ultimately, Nike was an incredible support. Of course, they have built an entire brand on great storytelling and sort of unlocking and unleashing human potential. But more importantly, they're not, Nike, running shoes aren't going to take you to the summit of Mount Everest, and they'd be the first to tell you that. They don't make, climbing boots or sleeping bags or tents, and so it wasn't such a product play for them. But what is, they have an incredible thing that they do is they take 1.5% of their pre-tax dollars and put them into a pool of money called the Global Community Impact, where they do incredible work around the world, making great charitable impacts. And one of their biggest tenets of that, if not their biggest, is around active and healthy kids. And so they sponsor a ton of school programs around getting kids outside, moving their bodies, after school programs. Globally, they do this. And so it was amazing. I'm from Portland, Oregon, and Nike, as world headquarters, is right here in my backyard. And so for me, and of course Nike being what it is always an amazing brand in my mind also. And it was amazing to realize that my passion for, sort of inspiring active, healthy kids, didn't really know about Nike's alignment in that when I picked it. I picked that because that's deeply something I'm deeply passionate about. But as I kind of dove deeper into sponsors and, potential people who could support this project, it was like, oh my God, like I love this. And they are really passionate about the same things I'm passionate about. So it was amazing to sort of find those touch pieces. And ultimately, that helped to build even more for us. So it was a hard process. Sponsorship game is never easy. Even now, it's not not particularly easy as I think about other projects. But I think it really comes down to finding the mission alignment with whoever that is, and the value proposition can be very different for different companies and people. And having a million conversations, and definitely the first time you hear no, don't be turned off, and the 100th time you hear no, don't be turned off, because maybe the next person's going to say yes. So there's certainly some maybe naive optimism in it all to just be like, well, who knows what's behind the next door? That was a no. All right, moving on. The next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And that's kind of how I did it. I probably took 1,000 meetings that year, most of which did not bear fruit, but got me a step closer to the ones that did.
Yeah, and I'm sure you had to get a good mix of like monetary sponsorship and then key positioning sponsorships of people that could provide resources, like you mentioned with the gear.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I think probably maybe people are curious, I'm definitely curious about, is when you are doing the logistics and the training for something like this. That's a significant amount of time in which you still have to pay for yourself to live and your wife or fiance before the actual mission. And so. How did you do that?
Yeah, so definitely there was not the possibility for me to just not work it took us, basically a year, 18 months from the idea to when I was taking my first steps towards the South Pole, which was the first expedition. Fortunately for me, like I said, I had been racing triathlon professionally throughout this time, and what I realized was, if I kind of just said in a vacuum, train for the 7 summits and the 2 poles, like what kind of training would you do? Well, of course you want to do some training in the mountains, but ultimately you would do a lot of cardio and strength, swimming, biking, running. Oh, wow, I'm already doing that.
Sure.
And so what I realized is at the time I had some pretty solid sponsorship to continue to race triathlon. And so I had been racing mostly the Olympic distance, which is known as the ITU circuit for people familiar with triathlon. And I shifted towards more long course racing. So I shifted towards half Ironman and Ironman distance racing that year. And so it allowed me to keep some of my triathlon income going while I was essentially training for a dual purpose. So I was still racing as a professional triathlete, which is a huge commitment of time, energy, etc. I did pare down my racing schedule somewhat. And in previous years, I had done about anywhere between 10 and 15 professional races per season. And I think the 2015 season, I raced probably more like 7 or 8 times, culminating in Ironman Japan, which was my last professional race in August of 2015. And so that's honestly how we kept the lights on, was to keep racing triathlon, which provided the dual purpose of providing a small income from that, but also was the training that I needed to do to basically prepare for the mountains. And honestly, had I just been doing the mountains, I probably would have been able to do a little bit more specific mountaineering training. But the triathlon training was going to have to suffice. And I did some interesting things. Like I raced that Ironman Japan at my last professional race ever. And then the next week, or a few days later even, I got on a plane in Asia from Japan and flew to Nepal to climb what I mentioned before, this mountain called Manaslu. And the idea was, I'm going to have to climb Everest after having been climbing mountains for 100 days. So what better way to simulate climbing a huge mountain than to race an Ironman at the professional level and then 3 days later try to climb the 8th tallest mountain in the world. So that was like my sort of Everest simulation within my training. So I got creative. I got creative to like combine what I was doing and the income that I had and the training and the time. But it was crazy. I mean, not only was I training and racing as a professional triathlete, which is enough to, basically sap all of your energy, I was also building this entrepreneurial venture in the same time, starting this nonprofit, trying to get sponsors, creating a website, creating a brand. I mean, there wasn't enough hours in the day, it felt like. And ultimately, I can't give, Jenna, my fiance, enough credit, is because she, like I said, carried the lion's share of that. And she wasn't, training as an athlete the whole time. So even when I was out riding my bike or running or swimming or racing or whatever, she was back behind the computer or her phone, making phone calls, sending emails, day in and day out throughout this process. So I certainly could not have done it without her just undivided love and support.
What I think is incredible is that a lot of people are going to look at the Explorers Grand Slam and the 2 world records and think like, wow, that's a really incredible thing that person did. And what they don't understand is all of the ingenuity and the creativity and the sacrifice and hustle that it took to even get to the starting line to start going toward the South Pole.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, totally. I joke. I say a couple of things. One is when I stepped out of the plane in the South Pole and the plane dropped me off, and here I am in the middle of Antarctica walking towards the South Pole. It's minus 40 degrees. Normally that'd be somewhat of an intimidating experience, and I was kind of like, oh, now I just have to walk in a straight line.
Yeah,
like that's
right.
so simple compared
Right.
to the 100 balls I've been trying to juggle just to get to that starting point. Getting to the starting point was incredibly hard. And then the other thing I joke about is that of course the 139 days were incredibly taxing. One of some of the hardest emotionally and physical thing that I've ever done in my life, of course, to get there. But I also say, while we were doing this, to make this project successful, all these things had to be running in the background, which is ultimately we had, 500 million earned media impressions, which allowed us to have this platform to speak to kids. We had these nonprofit and these liaising with these teachers and these school kids to actually have that impact, and all the other things going on, as well as figuring out how to fly me to 9 different locations and continents, and, the bureaucracy of getting in and out of these countries and climbing permits. I mean, it's endless, right? And
Yeah.
so Jenna was doing all of that, is the truth. And once I was out there climbing. And so again, I joke, I was like, oh, I just had to climb the mountains. Like she had the hard part because she was like running like 5 concurrent businesses without like the proper staffing or resources to do
Right.
that. And so really just incredible team effort, and an incredible, like you said, creative pursuit of ingenuity. And, we didn't, we were not experts in PR and media and branding and all of these types of things, and we weren't able to like hire on fancy PR firms and marketing people and all of this to like make everything look polished. Like we really just said, hey, we're gonna figure this out, and we fumbled our way through it at times, but ultimately it was successful across the board, and really has to, you said the word hustle is just down to just hustling and figuring it out and being willing to say, hey, we don't know how to do this, but we are willing to try our hardest, or we are willing to try to learn as fast as we can, and just diving into it without looking back. And did we make mistakes? Absolutely. Like, did we,
Sure.
if in the next iteration of projects or whatever, can we take many lessons and polish that format? Of course. But, at least we were willing to try, because oftentimes people would just say, oh, I don't know how to do that, so I can't do that. And we never just said, I can't. We said, I don't know how, but somehow we'll figure it out.
What was the most difficult part of the entire thing? Could have been one of the mountains or just in general. What do you think the most difficult part of the whole thing was?
Since I've talked a lot about the hustle of the business side, I'll talk more about the actual physical challenge of it, being, because of course that was incredibly challenging as well. I think the truly the hardest part, but probably one of the parts that I'm most proud of, and then this is how we get to the point of 2 world records rather than just 1 world record, is that I came off the summit of Everest, and I was at Camp 4. I recently gave a TED talk, and I discussed this moment because it's a very poignant moment for me. I come off the summit, and I call home to Jenna. I'm at Camp 4 on Everest, and I call home on the satellite phone. I say, hey, I've made it down from the summit of Everest. I was successful. I only have 1 more mountain to climb, Denali in Alaska, to finish the world record. And at this point, I was about 2.5 months ahead of the pace to set the Explorers Grand Slam world record. So it was kind of like, great. Like, as long as I can get up to Denali, which often takes about 3 weeks or so to climb, like, I'm going to do it. Like, it's kind of felt like I could see the light at the end of the tunnel. And she says something to me that I'll never forget. She's like, yeah, so I'm going to need you to put your boots back on right now. I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, so we've been doing some calculating back home, and it just so happens that if you can get to the summit of Denali in the next week, you'll not only set the Explorers Grand Slam world record, but you actually could also set the 7 summits record just on its own. And so to make clear what that is, the Explorers Grand Slam includes the North and South Pole, and the 7 summits, of course, is just the summits. And since I had been going to the North and South Pole in the middle of this project, I had never been targeting the 7 Summits Challenge. But I was out of schedule enough that if I could get there in a week, and I was like, so you need me to do what? And she was like, so I know you're at Camp 4, you just summited Everest, you're probably really exhausted. And I was like, yeah. She's like, I need you to put your boots back on, climb back down to base camp right now. There's no time for you to, rest, and there's going to be a helicopter that picks you up and takes you to Kathmandu, and then you can't shower or sleep in a hotel, but there's an evening flight that I've arranged that's going to take you to Dubai, to Seattle, to Anchorage, and then between all that flight time, you'll have about 3 days to get to the summit of Denali, and you could set 2 world records, not just one. And I was like, and not only had I just summited Everest, but of course I had done 7 mountains before that, and so I'm, 130 days into this whole journey, I'm completely exhausted, and all I could do was laugh in that moment.
Right.
But she knows how competitive I am and how driven I am, and of course I couldn't not give it a shot. And so I, kind of executed her plan. Just 100 hours after standing on the summit of Everest, I found myself at the base of Denali with a climbing partner who had been over there waiting for me to climb Denali, and ultimately. 3 days after starting the Denali climb, and less than a week after summiting Everest, I summited Denali, and within set not only the Explorers Grand Slam by about 2 months, but beat the 7 summits record by a day or two, just in the nick of time, essentially. So
Sure.
that week, you asked me what was the hardest thing, that week to summit Everest and the high of that, but then to not let down my guard and fly across the world and continue climbing and to push forwards. And to make matters worse, a huge storm actually descended on us on Denali on the day that we were trying to summit. And so no one on the entire mountain, any of the climbing teams actually even attempted to move on the mountain that day. And my climbing partner Tucker and I went out in a storm that had 50, 60 mile per hour winds and battled for 12 hours. From 14,000 foot camp up to the summit to make this attempt. So it was truly hanging it out there, definitely taking some risks and definitely pushing my body to its absolute limit. There's a video clip of me he was filming me when I took my last few steps to reach the summit, which was great because of course it's the moment that I was reaching my finish line and set records. And I think internally I was smiling. But if you look at the camera, the film, I just look on my face of just absolute, utter, just exhaustion. I don't know if it's relief. I don't know if it's just the deepest fatigue ever, but I can barely even feign a smile. I'm just I did it.
Right.
It's but I think that's what's beautiful about this. The word world record is something that I have aspired to, or certainly thought of as a high level of success in my life, and something I'm really proud of to have. But really, to do something that no one had ever done before, or faster than everyone's done before, of course, it's going to take pushing yourself to that exact limit. So, in a lot of ways, I'm proud of that look on my face when I crossed that finish line, because it proved to me that I was willing to kind of push myself to the absolute limit to achieve something that I really highly valued and was passionate about.
To give the listeners a little bit of an idea of how ridiculous that last sentence was, I'm partnering with a girl next year from Sweden, and she had summited Everest in 2013, I believe. And she talked about the time that she finished Everest. It took her body about 6 or 7 months to feel like it was normal again.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. I mean, so with the Explorers Grand Slam in general, fewer than 50 people have ever completed the challenge. And most of those people have done so over 10 years, 15 years. They climb one of these mountains, they train for it all year, they summit the mountain, and they come home, and then there's a 3 to 6 months recovery period. On an Everest expedition, it's not uncommon to lose 20 or 30 pounds. On a South Pole expedition, it's not uncommon to lose 20 or 30 pounds. On a Denali expedition, it's not uncommon to lose 20 or 30 pounds. I'm a thin guy. I couldn't lose 20 or 30 pounds 9 times in a row and still be a living. And so to be able to stack all of those on top of each other was certainly incredibly challenging thing to do from a physical stamina standpoint. And yes, I can attest to her that, of course, at the end of all of this, when I did get my feet back down on the ground in Alaska, there was a nice deep breath, and then it was a long, many months at least, if not more, of recovering and sleeping. And I think I feel good today. And then I'd sleep for 2 days, and then I'd wake up. And, it was complete exhausted. But fortunately, I always also set myself this goal, which at the beginning, which I said to define success for myself, and I was really clear about the fact that success for me was defined by of course, setting these world records, but more importantly, coming back from this adventure with all my fingers, all my toes, my health. Not to say I wasn't going to take myself really tired and push some limits, and I had actually a small cracked rib that happened while I was on Everest, so I was in some pain from that. But in general, I came back all in one piece, and other than needing to sleep for a few months, I'm proud to say that, my body is as strong as ever, and that's really, I define success that way for sure.
Last year, I pushed really hard, and I don't really like to use the word hard when I'm talking to you, but I will. And I ran 10 ultras, and then at the end of the year, I finished with a 200 miler. And
Wow.
right when that was over, there was about 3 days where I was thinking, like, I just don't know if I want this anymore. Like, it was such a long time to suffer. And it took, a while for my mentality to bounce back. Did you have that, or right away did you start focusing on the horizon?
It's interesting. I think that that's totally normal. I think as someone who's done a ton of ultras yourself, you're probably very familiar with this idea of type 2 fun, which is, for those that don't know what that means, it basically means that in the time you're suffering while you're doing it, but then after your birds, you get this weird nostalgia about the experience, and it seems like, oh, it was so fun when I was up on Everest and the wind was blowing and I was in my tent. But like at the time, you're like, there's nowhere else in the world I'd rather be anywhere other than where I am right now.
Right.
When you're running 200 miles or whatever it is, like you're not like, God, this is so cool. But then and then the day after, you're like, I'm never doing that again. And then a week later, you're like, I can't wait till the next time.
Yeah, exactly. That's perfect.
Something strange about the human condition or our own psychology that leads to that. So I'm no different than that. There were certainly moments where I was like, okay, I think I've been in enough cold places and been on enough mountaintops. Cool, like I'm good.
Yeah.
And then of course it doesn't take long before you're like, what's the next way how I could push my body? What's the next interesting thing? This and that and the other thing. So I've experienced both, and I find that I'm definitely still passionate about finding my own limits and pushing my body. That said, this past year, it's been just over a year now, and then I am starting to think about some other big projects heading into 2018. But I knew that particularly coming off doing this project straight after professional triathlon. So as I said, there was literally no gap between racing triathlon professionally, racing Ironman, and going straight onto this project essentially, that my body needed a little bit of rest. And so I gave myself the permission, kind of fighting my own, my own instincts in a lot of ways, to take this year a little bit easier. And what that looked like for me is I've still been an incredibly active person by a normal person's standards. But it was for the first time that I didn't have a really specific training regime, a really specific tangible goal, really pushing my body. I've had some really big days in the mountains. I've had some really big days outside. I've had some really big athletic days, but then, not with the same intensity or consistency or expectation that I have on myself. And that has been intentional. And that's actually been hard for me, interestingly enough, to give myself that freedom. But it was because I do value longevity in my sort of body and athleticism. And I was really, really worked at the end of all this. Like I said, I was healthy, so I didn't have any nagging injuries per se. But I know that just what this had done to me physically, being at that high altitude for so long, what it had done to me hormonally and things like that. I needed to let my body get back to equilibrium a little bit. And so that I think is something that in my younger age, I wouldn't have necessarily been so aware of. And I mentioned before that I was, really overtrained at one point in my triathlon career. And kind of realizing I'm 32 years old right now, and I hope that I have many more decades of being able to push my body and whatever that means. But there comes a time when you have to say, okay, I've been out here for 139 days, right on the heels of 7 years of racing triathlon at the highest level of the sport. Maybe it's okay if for the next 9 months I don't.
I only race occasionally.
Right? Yeah, exactly. And so again, it's funny, as someone that sounds like someone like yourself who did 10 ultras last year and all this sort of stuff, the feeling of what's the next thing? What's the next thing? I got to have the next goal. I got to, push towards that. And certainly I am the happiest probably when I am pushing, the envelope and pushing towards that next goal. But there is a time and a place to reflect and to digest and to be proud of what you've accomplished, and to kind of, in a metaphoric sense, take a deep breath. And I think I'm glad now looking back that I did allow myself the permission to do that.
Sure. Are you ready to tell us what's on the horizon, or are you still formulating those ideas?
I'm not ready to announce my next biggest projects, but certainly stay tuned on that. I am doing something fun in the next few weeks that I'll happily tell you about. I'm doing this thing, in Vermont. We've talked about this before we started the podcast to quote unquote Everest. So basically, a guy by the name of Jesse Itzler, who we mentioned Sarah Blakely earlier in this conversation. It's her husband, and he has rented out the mountain of Stratton, Vermont. And has invited a group of people out there to see if they can quote unquote climb Everest. And what that means is 17 laps of the ski mountain, which is about a mile long and about 30% grade on average, equals 17 laps of that equals 29,000 feet. So that's the summit of Everest from sea level. And so it's a endurance challenge to see who can quote unquote climb Everest, but basically while standing in Vermont, up and down the ski mountain. So just imagine kind of the worst and most grueling hill reps over and over and over and over and over again until you reach the summit of Everest. So
Perfect.
I'm doing that challenge in the next 3 weeks. Of course, I love testing myself in these challenges, and I love the creativity with someone like Jesse, who's a passionate ultra marathon and endurance athlete, and then the ability to say like, oh, let me think of even more random and creative ways to explore that. So I'm always on board for that. So that's something I've got coming up in a few weeks from now that I'm looking forward to kind of really get me back out there. But I'm gonna be coy now and not tell the next project, but they're coming in 2018. Some bigger projects. Well,
nice. Sounds good. So the Lionheart Kicker is a final question, and we try to ask every guest, and it's based on advice. So if you could give blanket advice and you were given a platform for the day, you created your own platform, and it were guaranteed that everybody in the world would hear it, and it would be translated to every language, and they might not all follow it, but they would definitely hear what you're saying. What would you tell people?
I love that question. If I had to put it into a few words, it would be keep pushing forwards. And now I'm going to give a little context to that, which is I think that this world is an incredible place when people are passionate about what they're doing. And I think too often, and also part of life is facing obstacles, facing setbacks, hardships. And too often in those moments, people stop pushing forwards. They hit the wall and they sit down and they give up. And if I could give anyone advice, it would be keep pushing forwards. I love the phrase, it's always darkest before the dawn. I think a lot of people say to me, well, if you could go back in a time machine, do you wish you never got burned in that fire? And in a lot of ways, the physical and emotional trauma that I went through, that my mom went through, that we all went through there during that time was literally horrific. I would never wish that upon my worst enemy. But at the same time, because I got through that and continued to keep pushing forwards, I also am where I am today. I learned some of my greatest lessons. And so my advice to anyone out there would be, no matter where you are, if you're on the summit of your Mount Everest right now, cheering your success, if you're at the base, just dreaming about a big idea, or if you're somewhere in between, you started something and now you're feeling set back or you're not going to make it, keep pushing forward. You never know what's right around the next corner. And if you continue to do that with forward motion, you're going to get to where you want to go.
That's cool. For people that are listening to this and they want to support your future endeavors and follow along with what you're doing, how can they do that?
All over social media. So I'm at Colin O'Brady on Instagram. That's probably where I'm most active. I was actually the first person to ever Snapchat from the summit of Mount Everest, which was viewed millions of times globally. So you can hit me there. But yeah, all across social media at Colin O'Brady, just my name. And then the website is beyond72.com, which has got information about some of the nonprofit stuff. And we're actually getting ready to do a little bit of a rebrand on that. So that website should look a little bit different in the coming months. And certainly that's where we'll be announcing the next iterations of projects and ideas and collaborations that we've got going on. So please reach out. I love it when people reach out or drop me notes. And the last thing I'll say is I mentioned it quickly earlier that I gave a TED Talk this spring that came out this summer online. So check that out on YouTube. It's called Change Your Mindset and Achieve Anything. I encourage you to check that TED Talk out as well.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll link all of that up in the show notes of this episode. So if you're driving, just be cool. Wait till you pull over and find it in the show notes. Hey, thanks for being on. I really appreciate you taking the time today and to talk about your journey. Thanks, Rick. I appreciate it. My pleasure. Perfect. Thanks, guys. Thanks for listening to Lionheart Radio. I hope that the information from today's show will make you fitter, happier, and healthier. For the show notes of this episode and every episode, head to www.lionheartrad.io. Yep, just like Lionheart Radio. And please, if you have the time, head over to iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. It really helps us to know that we're on the right track in delivering you reliable information and value. As always, feedback is welcomed. If you have any comments on the show or like to suggest a guest, send me an email at rick@luavive.com. That's LUAVIVE.com. Thanks for your support, and we will see you next time.
Bitch, I feel good. Don't I look stupendous? My shine is so endless, and shit you can do to end this. Even when I'm dead, niggas still gon' bump that chip shit. Coke, white, Escalade on cinches for you dipshit. So you won't forget this. Midwest nigga be the coldest. Cleveland